guys, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Artworks Epoxy and give you some tips and tricks on what works for me as far as getting a really beautiful, shiny, almost flawless finish. First off, let's talk about the epoxy itself. Artworks is a fantastic epoxy. One of the things I love about it is very low to no odor. There are UV inhibitors, which basically we know that all epoxy yellows at some point, but the UV inhibitors slow down the yellowing process in comparison to, say, Alumilite. Alumilite I've used for, I probably used it for about a year. It yellows super fast. The consistency is very different than Artworks. Artworks is a thicker epoxy, so it sets up faster. So when I mix my epoxy, I usually only mix enough for 3, maybe 4 cups at a time, because it does start setting up after that 3rd cup. I can usually do 4, but I wouldn't do any more than that. Part A is pretty thick, which I love because I feel that once it's mixed and it's a little bit thicker, it gives you a way better coverage, especially when you're working with chunky glitter. I just really love how it covers. I don't feel like I have to put a million coats on. But one thing I do is I heat my epoxy, just part A, because it thins it out just a little bit and it makes it easier to stir, and I feel that I get less bubbles. Now, now I use measuring cups for mine. Everybody does it differently, but I just like to use my measuring cups to get a really even part A and part B. It's 1 part to 1 part, equal parts. And then I transfer them into a cup and I mix them. Now I usually take my part A and I will warm it up with my heat gun. Now you have to be careful with the heat gun because you can get burnt, and you have to be very careful. Don't hold it too close. Make sure you're turning the epoxy. I pour it in my cup and then I turn it and put my heat on it. Now you can warm up a like a shallow bowl, and you can put your epoxy in here and then set it in the bowl and leave it in there for a few minutes, and it will also warm up your epoxy. So there's a couple ways to do that. I like to keep my epoxy in FIFO bottles. I love the FIFO. They're like just squeeze bottles. They tend to leak sometimes, so I always put them inside a cup. Let's see. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started, and I will mix some epoxy. Some of the things that I use to mix my epoxy, you can use these metal stir sticks. They're kind of like coffee stir sticks. They work very well, but because they are thin, it takes a little longer to mix the epoxy. Now these I also use, and these are from the Craft Attack, who sells Artworks Epoxy. These work really great. They're like little tiny mini plastic spatulas. I don't use anything else, especially I don't use wood stir sticks. They tend to introduce bubbles into your epoxy. So these are really your best bets for getting no bubbles to very few bubbles. So I'm going to go ahead and mix the epoxy and we'll get going. Okay, first I'm going to put in my part A, and I just squeeze it. And I have other cups to finish, so I'm just going to go all the way to the top with this. So this will be 30 ml, and then part B is a lot thinner and it goes a lot faster. And I fill that up. And then what I do is I will use popsicle sticks to get my epoxy out of these little cups and scrape you want to scrape off the sides and get as much epoxy as you can. So I just empty into my little cup here. And I just scrape it until I can't really get much more out. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, and then now I'm just going to set that aside for a minute, and I am going to warm up my part A. Now this is how I do it. Probably warming it in a warm bowl or hot water in a bowl would probably be better. I'm a little impatient and always in a hurry, so I just feel like this is faster for me. So I just do this and I put it on low. I don't put it on high. And I just keep warming it up on the side and turning it. And I do this for probably about a minute. And you can definitely tell the difference when you pour it in after you've warmed it up. It's a lot thinner, much easier to work with. The first time I used epoxy, the first time I used Artworks, I didn't know that it was thicker than what I was used to. And so once I tried this, my cups just went so much smoother. And then I just warm it on the top. That's probably enough. I kind of went a little close. So now I'm going to take part A. And you can see how easily that just poured in there, because it definitely warmed it up and thinned it out a little bit. So same thing, I'm going to scrape all the sides and get every little bit out of there that I can so that it's even on both sides. Okay. And that looks pretty good. Now, I don't use my stir stick anymore, or my popsicle stick anymore. Now I'm going to use the plastic stir stick, little spatula, and I'm just going to do it really slow, and I'm going to go in the middle and around the sides, and you're going to scrape off the sides and make sure you just get everything mixed. And I mix for about 3 minutes. Sometimes a little longer, it just depends, but 3 minutes is probably good. So I don't want to go too much faster than this, or you will get bubbles. Now I tend to mix pretty fast all the time, so I do definitely get bubbles. But the slower you go, the better you are, and you don't get as many micro bubbles. Those are a little pain in the butt. So I'm just going to mix this, and then we will get it applied. Okay, so my epoxy is mixed. Now I do have some bubbles, but that's okay. Like I said, that's not near as many as I usually get because I do stir fast. But these bubbles will come right out as soon as you hit it with the heat gun once you applied it to your tumbler. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this. I just pour a little bit on. Now I don't let my epoxy sit too long because I just apply it right away, because it does tend to set up faster than some epoxies. So I just go ahead. Now this is the final coat on this customer's tumbler. So we're going to put a nice finishing coat on it, and I'll hit it with the heat gun, and it should be good to go. I like to make sure I get tons of coverage. I hope you can see this. Now I like to go up and down, side to side. I rub it all over, and I like using a gloved hand because then I can feel if there's any spots that I've missed. So that feels pretty good. So then, once I get it all covered, I'll go back and I'll get my edges, make sure just every single inch is covered. And I like to scrape my edges a little bit on the bottom so they don't get thick. Okay, so that is pretty good. So now I'm going to hit it with my heat gun, and I'm just going to turn it on low. I don't like to turn it on high. You move it across fairly quickly. Get any of those bubbles. And I only do it one time around. And then I'll come back in, say, 15 minutes, and I will hit it one more time with my heat gun, and it should be good to go. And I have very few bubbles. I don't see any micro bubbles, but just in case some bubbles do come to the surface, you'll be able to get it with that second hit with the heat gun. Now don't hold the heat gun in one spot too long. You don't want to do that either. That will create fish eyes. So that's it. I'll post a picture of the finished cup. If you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. And listed in the comments will be the link for the Craft Attack, where you can get your Artworks epoxy, and you can also get your little stir sticks, and there are all kinds of things on the website to help make your cups just as beautiful as they can be. Again, I hope this was helpful. It's kind of a learning curve if you've only used epoxies that are non-UV and also a little bit of a thinner consistency. So these tips I'm hoping will help, and that's it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.